So the results are in from Super Tuesday, Part 3. This was unfortunately a very bad night for Bernie Sanders. He lost all 3 states, so Arizona, Florida, Illinois. Those all went to Joe Biden, and Ohio was postponed, as we talked about yesterday. So in Arizona, Joe Biden got 43.6% of the vote, Bernie Sanders 31.7%. Illinois, Biden got 59% of the vote, Sanders got 36%. And in Florida, Biden did best here. He got 61.9% of the vote, and Sanders 22.8% of the vote. So we don't want to sugarcoat things, okay? This is very bad. This is not looking good at all for Bernie Sanders. And unfortunately, Joe Biden has a very clear lead now in number of delegates, and it looks like he has a clear path to the nomination. He might win an outright majority too, so there won't even be a contested convention. Now, what's really interesting to me is that even though Joe Biden is winning these states, and he won really well last Super Tuesday and the one before it, what's really interesting to me, these results are not consistent with the exit polls in terms of policy. And we've talked about this before, okay, but I'm going to reiterate. You're seeing a very clear trend here of people voting against their own self-interest because they say they want Medicare for all, they say they want Social Security, then they go and vote for Joe Biden. So what's going on here? Let's just look at the exit polls from Florida last night. 59% say they trust Biden on Social Security. Obviously, the lights are on, but nobody's home because Joe Biden will dismantle Social Security. Joe Biden doesn't want to give you Social Security. Joe Biden has been trying to gut Social Security for the last 40 years. So not just that, but also with Medicare for all. Here you have 57% saying they do support Medicare for all. Only 32% oppose it. So clearly, the majority here in Florida, according to these exit polls, want Medicare for all. So why are they voting for a candidate, Joe Biden, who said he would veto Medicare for all? This makes no sense whatsoever. And this is not just with Florida. So Washington, Mississippi, Missouri, Michigan, most people want a single-payer healthcare system. So why are they voting for someone who does not align with the policies that they wish to see implemented? I mean, there's only 2 possible conclusions here. Either something is being rigged, or people are being brainwashed to the point where they are willingly voting against their own self-interest. I think it's a bit of both. When it comes to people voting against their own self-interest, well, in some cases, you have people who flat out believe that, yeah, Joe Biden wants to maintain Social Security. He's going to expand it, matter of fact, just like we saw in some of those status quo interviews, right? You have some people who think that Joe Biden genuinely supports Medicare for all, which is lunacy. However, what I think is happening in most cases is that people have been sold this electability lie. Oh, Bernie Sanders is unelectable. Oh, Joe Biden is the only one that we can possibly vote for in this time of crisis. We need to unseat the orange Cheeto, the orangutan who's sitting in the Oval Office. So they go and vote for Joe Biden, thinking that, yeah, he's got the best chance to unseat Donald Trump, which is the +1 priority here. But I mean, even that is not true. That's not happening. You're going to have a very hard time unseating an incumbent president who has a 90+ favorability rating within his own party. I mean, technically speaking, Donald Trump is the most popular Republican president in modern history. You're going to have a very hard time bringing over any of his voters, and you're going to have a very hard time getting out the youth vote when you're putting forward someone like Joe Biden. So this whole lie that's been sold by MSNBC and CNN to older voters that Joe Biden has the best chance of beating Donald Trump is pure fantasy. So despite the fact that they want their Social Security protected, they want Medicare for all, they're going out and voting for Joe Biden, who is the worst candidate on almost any issue that you can fathom. So, unfortunately, you're seeing things like this. At the same time, let's make no mistake here. This is not just a case of brainwashing. This is also a case of voter suppression and rigging. Okay? I mean, when you're closing down polling stations at the last minute and not telling people where they've been moved, when election officials, volunteers, judges aren't showing up to the primary because of a global pandemic, because there's a virus, and you insist on holding the primary anyway, knowing that most people are probably not going to show up, or a lot of people, a significant amount, are going to be staying at home, that's irresponsible, that's voter suppression, and that's putting people's lives at risk, not to mention. And everything else that we've seen, we're not just talking about yesterday, which was probably the worst one yet, but we also had this shadow app being funded by Pete Buttigieg, who is also running in that race. And this discrepancies between exit polls and the actual results. I mean, according to the United Nations' own election guidelines, you shouldn't have anything more than 4% discrepancy between exit polls and the final results. Yet, if you look at Texas and other places, Joe Biden is having 15 plus percentage points difference between the exit polls and final results, which is, I mean, a bit shady to say the least. And on top of that, I mean, you have people's ballots not being counted, trickling out results, people being given the wrong ballots, their ballots being stored on USB sticks. We have too many examples to count at this point. And by the way, huge shout out to Craig Pasta and Fiorella Isabel. I was on their show on the Convo Couch. They've been covering the election fraud, the interference, the voter suppression extensively. They've been doing an amazing job at this. So big shout out to them. And so to call these primaries, to call what we've seen so far a legitimate primary, a legitimate election, is really a stretch. So I think it's both factors at once. You have so much wrong incompetence, negligence, and flat-out corruption from the DNC, holding primaries during a global pandemic, rigging the votes, siphoning votes, making sure people can't even vote in the first place. And on top of it, very, very effective brainwashing from the mainstream media, which is effectively a propaganda tool. They're not there to give you objective journalism. They're there to feed you whatever the DNC and their overlords have given them, whatever l'agenda du jour happens to be. So they've done a great job at making voters, especially older voters, go out and cast ballots that go against their own self-interest. Yeah, that's been very, very, very effective. So both factors have put us in the situation that we are in right now. And unfortunately, it's looking like Bernie Sanders doesn't have a clear path to the nomination. I mean, mathematically speaking, he could still win it if a miracle happens and somehow Joe Biden, people actually find out about his record. That would be nice. But mathematically speaking, yes, Bernie Sanders, he still needs 61% of the available delegates to clinch the nomination. Joe Biden only needs 40% of them. It's looking very tough for Bernie Sanders. Now, he has said he's not going to drop out. Okay. He has suspended his ads on Facebook. That's the latest report. But Faiz Shakir, his campaign manager, said that he has no intention of dropping out. So they're reassessing the strategy now. And it's a tough call, man. After everybody coalesced, all those other candidates dropped out and coalesced behind Biden. The Sanders campaign were not expecting this. Their strategy was to get at least 30% of the vote in every single primary. That would have secured them a win. But now the whole game has changed. Now they're being forced to compete against one opponent who has the entire establishment, all of Wall Street, busting out their checkbook behind him. This is a whole new game. This is a whole new beast that they've been forced to reckon with. And unfortunately, it is taking its toll. So you've even had hashtag #DropOutBernie trending on Twitter now, which is a goddamn joke because all of these establishment hacks, these neoliberals, these disgusting centrists who stand for absolutely nothing except perpetual war and bailing out banks, which is, you know, Republican agenda minus a bit of the racist stuff. A bit of it. So all these hacks are now saying, oh, Bernie Sanders should drop out. Oh, it's over. Give Joe Biden the nomination. We're done here. Listen, I clearly recall after New Hampshire, actually, you know, at the New Hampshire debate, that 5 out of 6 candidates said they would be going to the DNC convention and they will be contesting the nomination, even if they don't have the plurality, even if they don't have a majority of delegates. So why the hell should Bernie Sanders drop out now? You were clearly in favor of Joe Biden going all the way to the convention and contesting the nomination when Bernie Sanders was looking like he was in the lead and he was about to run away with this thing a mere 2 weeks ago. So why the sudden change of heart, may I ask? Oh, we all know why, because they're hacks. That's why. They're absolute hacks. And honestly, going forward now, Bernie Sanders has to stay in. There's no way that he can drop out, because if he dropped out now, I mean, nothing would be gained at all. Bernie Sanders has gained a lot of political capital. He has a lot of leverage now. Now, okay, people think that if he endorses Biden, miraculously, magically, all the younger voters are going to go and vote for Biden. They're sorely mistaken. However, nonetheless, Bernie Sanders does have leverage here, and so he needs to exercise that leverage. Now, I'm not saying he should ask Joe Biden for a cabinet position. Highly unlikely. Now, one example that I see being floated out there is people saying that Bernie Sanders should make Joe Biden say that he's going to sign or pass Medicare for all in exchange for Bernie Sanders to drop out. That's one kind of deal that they are talking about. I don't see that happening, honestly, because even if Joe Biden agreed to that, he'd only be saying that to get Bernie Sanders to drop out. He's never going to actually do it. Of course not, because that's Joe Biden. So what do you expect? The guy's not doing it. He literally said last week that he would veto Medicare for all. He's not going to change his position. So look, personally, I don't really see how Bernie Sanders is going to use his leverage to get anything out of the DNC and Joe Biden, because you can't trust either of them. So effectively, that avenue doesn't look very bright to me. However, I don't think that Bernie Sanders should be dropping out at all with or without a deal or whatever kind of concessions people are talking about. No, Bernie Sanders should definitely stay in the race. It's all but over. Who knows what's going to happen? This whole thing is volatile. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden was looking like an old fart, and Bernie Sanders was the front runner. So anything could happen at this point. Yes, it's not looking particularly good. Again, we're not trying to sugarcoat things. It's looking very, very likely that Joe Biden will get the nomination. However, we are in very volatile times, this primary alone in itself, but on top of it with the virus outbreak, with how the stock markets are changing. I mean, anything could happen at this point. So definitely the last thing Bernie Sanders wants to do right now is drop out. And while some people, of course, are naturally devastated by this, obviously this is, a grieving moment. A lot of people are already thinking about Dem exit, leaving the Democratic Party, understandably so, and exploring third-party options. Okay, now that is an entire beast in itself, but I honestly think that at this point, the Democratic Party have shown themselves time and time again, the last election, this election, that they are not just unwilling to reform, but that they're also very willing to play dirty, to make sure that the party can't be changed, to make sure that a progressive can get into power, to make sure that any kind of progressive reform is completely and utterly shut out. So I think it's very clear at this point, you have no avenue with either of the parties. Remember, this is a one-party system that serves corporations. There's no distinction between Democrats, Republicans. This is fantasy. This is delusion. They are one and the same. They have different labels on their names, a D or an R, but at the end of the day, they all serve the same donors. It is what it is. So you have no avenue whatsoever and no recourse with them. The only alternative at this point is third party, building a true progressive party that is completely unbeholden to corporations and 100% beholden to grassroots donations and run by grassroots workers, labor movements, and unions, and people from the working class. No one from the political establishment, no one from the corporate elite. Or you're going to have to explore the avenue of civil unrest, peaceful civil unrest, yellow vests, etc., etc. These are the only options left at this point, because I think that trying to do the same thing over and over, running a progressive in 2024 is not going to work. It's not going to work. I mean, this is fantasy. You have to come to terms with that at one point. And people are saying that, trying to go third party is an insurmountable challenge. Honestly, I think trying to change the Democratic Party and reform it from within is an even more insurmountable challenge than that. So abandon this. You've tried this already 2 times. It's not going to work. You're not going to get a better candidate than Bernie Sanders for a long, long, long time. And if he couldn't do it, you have no chance of doing it, because they've shown you over and over again they will play dirty, they will not play ball, they will use every trick in the book to subvert voters coming out, your will being heard, progressive values being implemented. They are not on board with any of it. None of it. And Joe Biden is showing you that he's not going to make any concessions whatsoever. So yes, that is a grim picture. That is a grim reality, but I can't sugarcoat it. And I'm just giving you my honest opinion as of now with the conclusions that we can draw from 2016 and 2020. This is where it's at.